Hello and welcome to another photography video. First of all, just to say thank you to anybody who's been in touch, and quite a few of you have, just to check how I am, and I hope that you're doing okay during this really difficult time. So this video is a bit different. It's not really a vlog, it's not really a tutorial. What I'm going to talk about is my journey in terms of the lenses that I've used ever since I got really serious into wildlife photography. So I wouldn't consider this a review. Hopefully it's going to help you if you're trying to make a few decisions yourself on what lenses to buy. I'm basically going to talk about the journey from the first lens that I had and then progressing on from there, how I've used those lenses, what the advantages and disadvantages are, and I'm going to show you some sample images that I've taken with each lens as well. Bear in mind I've used different camera bodies during this time. Everything's Canon, so all the camera bodies I've used are Canon, and all the lenses I've used for wildlife photography are Canon as well. So just to briefly mention the camera bodies that I've had when I've used these lenses, I started with a 20D and then a 40D, 50D, 1D Mark IV, and then onto the original 1DX, which I'm still using at the moment. First up is this lens, which is the original Canon 300mm f4 lens, and there's no image stabilization on this lens. As you can see, this thing is just battered completely. It's got scratches all over it. It looks like it's been through some kind of assault course, but it still works, and I actually use this for photographing red kites in flight. So I forgot to check the weight on it, but it's probably around 1 kilo. There's really not much weight to it. It makes it very portable, really easy to carry and to handhold for long periods of time. As I said, no image stabilization on this lens. Pretty fast focusing, say I use it for birds in flight. Minimum focusing distance of 2.5 meters, which is reasonably good, and I get decent image quality out of it as well. I've actually had this lens for 20 years. Bought it off some guy in Wales outside a petrol station. Yeah, you can see it's pretty beat up. So when I got this, I was using a Canon 5D, and I wanted more reach because 300mm wasn't really enough reach. So what I did was to use this lens with a 1.4 extender, which I've got on there now. So that was my combination. I was for a long time to use this 300mm lens with a 1.4 extender. At the time it was the original Mark 1 extender. At the moment now I've got the Mark 3 extender on it. So I'm going to show you some images which I've taken using the 300mm lens on its own and also the 300mm with a 1.4 extender. So for a long time, this was the biggest focal length I had, a 300mm with a 1.4 extender, which actually makes 420mm. So I used this with a number of camera bodies. I remember using it with a 40D and a 50D, but the problem was I couldn't use anything more than the center focus point. So I couldn't use different focus points, I could only use the center, and what that meant was I'd have to constantly be recomposing. So I'd focus on the bird, whatever it was, and then have to recompose. I couldn't move the focus point around. So that's a bit frustrating, quite a disadvantage. And it was also really difficult to avoid the noise, particularly at slightly higher ISOs. I wouldn't say really high, but even at ISOs of around 800 with the camera body and this combination I was using. So I think everything combined, including the extender, really increased the noise levels. So it was quite a challenge. I had to try and keep the noise down as much as possible. So the main reason I use this, I've got better lenses nowadays, but I would still use this quite often for the bigger birds in flight, such as the red kites, like I said earlier, maybe gannets, for example. I do find it's still pretty fast focusing. So for quite a long time I used that 300mm and the 1.4 extender to give me more reach. So eventually I wasn't happy enough with the quality, and then I moved on to this, which is the Canon 400mm f5.6, and I'm a big fan of this lens. I did a review on it. I'll put a thing up in the corner to the review I did on this lens. Bought this one, I think this is the only big lens I've bought brand new. I bought this brand new because it's not hugely expensive. Weight is 1.3 kilos, which is really hand holdable, carry it around. I often use it with a strap which I attach to the foot there, and the Black Rapid strap, which I absolutely love. Fantastic for walkabout. f5.6 with this lens, so it's not obviously not as good as f4, it's not as fast, and it does struggle a bit more in low light. Minimum focusing distance of 3.5 meters. Focusing is still pretty fast on this lens, particularly in strong sunlight. Now, compared to using the older 300 and the 1.4 extender, this was a definite step up in image quality. Just looked overall better and clearer images and cleaner backgrounds. As I say, the disadvantage of this lens really is low light. I do find it struggles quite a bit in low light situations, so I don't like to use it in low light too much. I think if you want to get the most out of this lens, I would try and close the aperture down a bit. That's what I tend to do. I very rarely shoot at f5.6. I often close it down to f6.3 or f7.1 or even f8. I think you get a slightly sharper and crisper image by doing that. I use this lens for all sorts of things. I do use it for birds in flight. Have used it in the past for lots and lots of perching birds, particularly when I've been working from hides, and sometimes when I've done that I've actually paired it up. At the time was with a 13mm extension tube, so that was a really nice combination. So 400mm I'd say is almost like a necessity for wildlife photography and bird photography as a minimum, but also, you know, of course you can add a 1.4 extender or even maybe a 2 times. You can still add an extender to this lens and it will work. So that's going to give you 560mm. That's something that I do occasionally, not very often, because we've already got quite a low aperture at 5.6. If we add the 1.4 extender onto here, then it's bringing the aperture down to f8, so you've got even more of a problem in lower light and slower shutter speeds. So the focusing will also get slower and the backgrounds become more noisy as well. I wouldn't advise too much that you use an extender on this lens. However, in really, really good strong light, as it is now, it's kind of too strong really for making videos, but in really good quality light, I've used the 1.4 extender, kept the shutter speed pretty high, and I've got some really, really sharp images. They've just been perfectly sharp. So my advice, yes, you can use the 1.4 extender with this lens at times, but I would try and restrict it for bright sunlight and not really use it in overcast or weak light. I've had this lens for quite a few years and I've used it for so many different things. I think it's quite versatile really. So general photography, sometimes even working from hides, and particularly hand holding. Also good for travel as well. So if I don't really want to take my big lens onto the plane, then this is another option as well. And then finally, I've had to come back because it's just so massive. Finally the beast, which is the 500mm Canon f4 Mark 1. So this is the Mark 1 lens, the older one, which is much heavier. This thing weighs in at nearly 4 kilos, so it's really, really heavy. It's not portable. Yes, you can carry it, you can hand hold it for a while, but it's not really a portable lens. It's more suitable for putting yourself in one place, maybe working from a hide. This lens does have image stabilization. It's the only one of my wildlife lenses that has image stabilization, which I hardly ever use anyway. So probably the reason for upgrading to a bigger lens was not so much the image quality. It is slightly better, I think, but I don't think there's a huge amount in it compared to the 400. The main reason for upgrading was two things, and that was, one was the faster focusing that would cope better, and particularly in more difficult light situations, and the other reason was just simply to get me more reach. And bear in mind that again, we can still use a 1.4 extender, so we've got a 500mm lens which you can add an extender on to give even more reach. So this lens is really fast focusing, really responsive, f4, which is going to allow more light, it's going to help you to keep ISOs down, shutter speed up, or even both. With my camera, the 1DX, I can use this lens with a 1.4 extender, and unlike the 400mm, I can still use all my focus points. So that is the beauty of it. If I do add the extender, I can still use all those focus points rather than just being restricted to the center one. If we add the extender, it's going to take this down to f5.6, which isn't too bad. With this lens, I actually replaced the foot. So this isn't the original. It's a great thing to do this, I think. Rather than use the original lens foot, I've replaced it with this, which is a Kirk lens plate. And this then goes directly into the top of my gimbal head. So it means you don't have to add another plate on top of the Canon foot. Instead, you can just have one thing that fits straight in. And because you don't have to put another plate on there, you're also reducing the weight slightly as well. So of course the biggest downside with this is the size and the weight, and it is a real issue. So I really use this lens for putting myself in one place and working from a height, and you really do need some kind of support. So ideally a tripod, possibly a monopod, and if you can do a beanbag is a really nice option as well. I do handhold this lens occasionally, but I can only really do it for short periods of time, and then I have to put it down again. If you want to see more videos on improving your wildlife photography, then click the tutorial playlist up here. If you're not subscribed, do click the subscribe button and make sure you click the bell icon to be notified every time I upload a new video. Thanks for watching, I'll see you next time.